Nestled along the north shore of Flathead Lake, you'll find a town mostly untouched by time. Summers is a sleepy place as pretty as its name, but at one time it was a bustling sawmill and railroad town. Kevin Mackey has our Montana moment.
In the first half of the 20th century, they called Summers the industrial hub of the Flathead Valley.
Had the biggest sawmill in the state of Montana, along with the tie treating plant.
Summers was a company town. The Great Northern Railroad owned everything.
The company owned the houses and the land when they first started. It goes along with that song, I owe my soul to the company store.
Ken's dad had the Summers Garage, the only service station in town.
In the garage up there, we knew everybody.
This is Summers Company Town Project Museum.
The focal point of the museum is the S2 engine. The Great Northern bought the S2 fireless steam engine in 1929 to do the switching for the railroad's tie treating plant. The S2 never left Summers.
My grandfather was a locomotive engineer on this, and as a kid we would ride around on this engine.
Dave himself is a retired railroad engineer. The museum offers an extensive history of a unique Montana community. Francis lived on a farm outside of town.
I was born right up here on the hill in Summers, just a few hundred feet from this hall. And then we moved out to the farm in 1934 and have been there ever since. Yeah, we had everything we ever wanted to do right here, and we were a tight community. We had a good baseball team. We were a championship baseball team all the time.
They have sand like the sand of Hawaii.
They had beaches to swim from, cliffs to dive off, and ice to skate on.
What else was there to do? We didn't have cars. We didn't have highways. Going to town to the movie was a real treat, you know. We used to have movies in the old town hall that burned down here. Dances every Saturday night. There was a still in every house, and so we used to have a lot of good times here in town, I'm telling you.
Mill workers came from all over the world. When Jan worked at the post office in the 50s, she heard all kinds of languages.
Some spoke Norwegian, some spoke Swedish, Italian.
Of course, Native American languages were spoken in Summers. It was a strategic tribal meeting place for hunting and fishing, a point of trails for travel to other parts of the Northwest. In its early days, movement for working people in Summers was limited. The Great Northern built a fence around the town.
The gates were opened at 6 in the morning, and the people that were just out of town that were working at the mill, that way they could get in to go to work. But then at 10 o'clock at night, then the gates were closed. There was 2 gates, one on the east end of town and then one on the west. But they were closed, and you couldn't get in, and you couldn't get out, either one.
Night watchmen made sure. Today, the houses, stores, and businesses are privately owned, but most are tied to Summers' past. This was the company's doctor's office.
Well, I'm standing in front of what used to be the original bank in Summers, this half, and this half was the original post office. I'm standing in what is now Sliders Lumber Company's building, but this was the original Summers Company town store, and you bought everything here, charged it, and it was taken out of your paycheck. There used to be about 2 miles of sidewalk, wooden sidewalk, boardwalk.
This is the old Great Northern Main Line from Kalispell to Summers.
This is what brought in all the ties, took out the ties, creosote, all the lumber from the Summers sawmill.
When we come back, childhood memories, a first date, and the Paul Bunyan. Behind me was the old Summers Lumber Company, which operated from 1901 to 1948. Here at Summers Bay, tugboats used to tow logs from all over the Flathead Valley to be processed into railroad ties. Some of the logs were milled into lumber. You can still see the old piers. This is the Paul Bunyan.
The logs would be brought down from the forest and dumped into the lake, and the Paul Bunyan would go get them, and they had a big log boom. There was logs all hooked together with chains, and they'd float and they'd wrap around the logs, and they'd pull them back to Summers, thousands of logs at one time.
Big Arm, Dayton, Rollins, they stopped at all them places and picked up booms of logs. My dad and my granddad at Rollins logged for the mill. Everything was done with horse then.
The passenger train, you could get on it at Columbia Falls, ride right down to the dock. They'd drive right into the dock out there, and they'd get right off the train and right onto a paddle wheeler and go to Polson. That was their way to get out of the county.
On one of their first dates, Francis took Jan to see the sawmill.
You want to go down and see the sawmill? So we went down to see the sawmill and took her all through it, and You could walk around through the basement and all the big gears and everything whirling and banging ahead of you.
The Great Northern operated the mill until 1948 and sold it to the DeVoe family, who ran it till 57 when it was destroyed by fire, ending the sawmill in Summers. It left 375 people out of work.
Most of them had to leave the area to go find work someplace else.
Ken worked at the tie trading plant.
The ties would come in on the big train Tuesdays and Thursdays, and we would break that train down to be unloaded in the grain yard for air stacks to dry before they treated them.
The tie mill used to sit off here to my left.
Because of creosote contamination, the plant location became a Superfund site. Creosote was used to treat the ties to keep insects out so they wouldn't rot. The tie plant closed in '86.
Timber was getting short on supply for a sawmill that size. Railroad ties kind of disappeared with the concrete ties, so times change and things go away.
But Summers is still here. The Great Northern Company offices, the old ice house, the water tower, the old O'Brien mansion on the hill.
A lot of childhood memories from down here.
Dave shows us all over town, past the old mill site.
This is a yacht club down here now. The North Flathead Lake Yacht Club. Box plant right here. And this is where they made wooden boxes years ago.
Every neighborhood had a name. Pickleville, the 7 Row.
And we're on Burns Avenue. This area of Summers used to be called the Dirty Dozen. This was my great aunt's house. Her name was Alice Korb. And this was the telephone office. So I think it was moved to Kalispell in 1952. But she had it, and she had the switchboard.
On the corner is the old Methodist church.
It's been rebuilt after a fire. Now we're going up Pavilion Hill.
That's probably where you lived if you were a mill superintendent. Summers isn't the industrial hub of the Flathead anymore.
But it was a huge operation in its day. And just all of a sudden it seemed to vanish with time.
But its history, its images, and stories haven't vanished at the Summers Company Town Project. Kevin Mackey, NBC, Montana.